Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. Today we are going to talk about the Oxford movement in English literature. This is your lecture number 21 and class is History of English Literature, ComSat's Virtual Campus Islamabad. My dear students, previously when we were talking about Victorian age, so I told you the characteristics of that age, and before that we talked about Renaissance and other eras in the history of English literature as well. So here we are going to enter into an entirely a new domain in the history of English literature, that is known as the Oxford movement in English literature. Okay. So my dear students, here you can see, like first of all let me introduce to the aims of this very movement. Here I just want to share something with you. Okay. One only way to life, one faith, delivered once for all. One holy band, endowed with heaven's high call. One earnest, endless strife. This is the church, the eternal framed of old. So, basically, my dear students, these lines are from a poem by John Keble, the founder of the Oxford movement. So, my dear students, you can see like these lines give us some help to answer the question as to what the Oxford movement was about. This movement was fundamentally religious in nature, and one of its aims was to rehabilitate the dignity of the church and to deliver it from the grasp of secular authority. So my dear students, I'll just underline few things for you. Here you can see like Oxford movement was basically religious in nature. So my dear students, here you can see like we'll just try to focus on the revival of the religious thoughts during the Oxford movement. Okay, so you can see here we'll talk about the dignity of the church and about the secular authority as well. Okay, so basically my dear students, you can see in this slide who was basically this founder of Oxford movement. The name of that person was John Keble. Okay, and you can see like here, as I told you before as well, like to some extent the Oxford movement, what basically is that. So that is why I'm giving you more information about this one, because this movement plays a very important role in the development of history of English literature. Okay, but that was only one of the many full issues which the movement dealt with. Some other issues may also be mentioned here. One of them was the growing strength of liberalism in religion and politics. So my dear students, here you can see like at that time people were quite liberal and free to choose their religion, and they can follow religious practices in their lives according to their choice. The protagonists of this movement came forward to combat tooth and nail all such liberalism as appeared in the church as Libertarianism. The Oxford movement had nothing to do with politics, but it favored conservatism or Toryism, of course, in religion. So my dear students, here you can say like at that time liberalism or freedom of people, that was on the top. Okay, so everybody was free to choose his or her religion or the religious practices for leading his or her life. So my dear students, here you can say like basically it was totally against liberalism. Okay, so as far as religion is concerned, so basically they used to follow conservatism in this movement. Okay, as W.H. Hutton points out in the Cambridge History of English Literature, volume 7, it was certainly not a Tory movement, but it was opposed to liberalism in all its aspects. So my dear students, here you can say at that time that was the need of time as well, because people, they had quite liberty and freedom to choose their religion. Okay, so here this is basically based on the conservative views. Okay, to the philosophy of conservatism, the Oxford leaders were much indebted. Okay, further, the movement was opposed to rationalism in matters concerned with the church. So basically that was a reaction against these movements which were going on during that time in England. Okay, The Victorian age witnessed a rapid and tremendous expansion of physical science, and even more in the 18th century, the age of prose and reason. So my dear students, here basically we are referring to the 18th century when you could see that was the age of prose and reason. Okay, so my dear students, basically during the Victorian era you could see industrial revolution plus you can say a very good time for the physical science as well. Okay, so you could see like the 18th century is also known as the age of prose and the age of reason. Okay, there was a temptation in the 19th to put religion to the test of rational scientific examination. T.H. Huxley, for instance, became an agnostic after failing to be convinced to the truth of Christianity considered rationally and scientifically. So my dear students, here there is a reference of one more author. The name of that person is T.H. Huxley. So you can see like he became an agnostic after failing to be convinced to the truth of Christianity at that time, and you know, everything was based on rational at that time or of reason. Okay, so my dear students, you could see like as a reaction against rationality and you know, science of that time, you could see like he was he basically became an agnostic at that time. Okay, dear students, here you can see on this slide Newman and the Oxford movement, because he was the founder and the most prominent figure as far as the Oxford movement is concerned. So here we'll talk about his contribution in the Oxford movement. Okay, basically the Oxford movement was an attempt to recover a lost tradition. Okay, England had become a Protestant country in the 16th century under the reign of Elizabeth and had her own church called the Anglican Church, which became independent of the control of the Pope at Rome. Before that, England was a Catholic country. So my dear students, you can see sometimes England is under the Catholic Church and sometimes it is, you can say, under the Protestant Church. So dear students, here basically this Oxford movement is particularly, you know, relevant to religious activities which were going on at that time in England. Okay, so here you can see it is basically a revival of the lost tradition. Okay, so here you can see some of the phases you know, of church in England, sometimes under the Protestant custody and sometimes it is under the Catholic custody. So dear students, under you can say during the reign of Elizabeth, you could see England had become a Protestant country. Okay, so here we are talking about the 16th century. Okay, when Queen Elizabeth was ruling there in England. So at that time it became the, you know, Protestant country. Okay, so basically they gave a proper name to the Protestant church at that time, and that is known as Anglican Church. Okay, so here you can see which became independent of the control of the Pope at Rome. So basically Pope was at Rome, so it was not at all under the control of Pope, who was basically controlling all the churches of, you know, the world at that time. So here this is an independent church. Okay, so in Rome it was you can say Catholic church over there, and you know, all the churches were under the custody of Roman church. Okay, so that was Catholic. So here when we talk about English society in the 16th century during the reign of Elizabeth, so you could see Protestant views were there and the church was independent. It was not at all under the control of you know, Pope at Rome. Okay, so it was basically the background of the Oxford movement as well, and then we'll talk about Newman's contribution in the Oxford movement. Okay, the Anglican Church, the Protestant church which we were talking before, insisted on simplicity and did not encourage elaborate ceremonies. So my dear students, you could see they skipped too many religious ceremonies from the church. Protestant, they are quite liberal people as compared to Catholics. So dear students, they were towards you know, simplicity. Okay, in fact it became too much rational, having no faith in ritual and old traditions. So dear students, Protestant church is quite a modern church as well, so they didn't have like people during that era, they didn't have any faith on rituals and on old traditions. Basically that's you can say a kind of a reaction against the old traditions, what people they were following and the kind of practices which they used to do in the church, so they lost all those traditions. Okay, especially in the 18th century in England, religion became to be ruthlessly attacked by philosophers as well as scientists. So here, dear students, the description of the condition of church in the 18th century. So here you can see, like in England, we are talking about religion over here. Religion began to be ruthlessly attacked by. So previously, when you talk about Roman church, so everything is under the control of Pope. So when you talk about the Protestant church, okay, that is you can say which was being practiced over there in England during the 16th century. Okay, so you can see nothing is under the control of Pope, so you can say it is attacked by the philosophers and scientists in the 18th century. So my dear students, here you can see like basically Oxford movement is a revival of religion once more here in England, and you can say the revival of the old traditions or the Roman traditions as far as the religion is concerned in England. Okay, the protagonists of the Oxford movement tried to show that the Middle Ages had qualities and capacities which the moderns lacked. So dear students, you could see the revival of previous age here in the during the Oxford movement. What basically is that Newman was basically the protagonist of the main protagonist of the Oxford movement. So he was of the view the Middle Age, he preferred basically Middle Ages. Okay, and he said that the Middle Ages had capacities and qualities which in today's world you can say we cannot see. Okay, so basically he was in favor of the Catholic Church, okay, and he was promoting Catholic Church in England. That is why it was you can say the religion of Middle Ages as well. Okay, during the Middle Ages people used to follow, people had Catholic Church. Okay, so basically this is a revival of Catholic Church in England. They wished to recover the connection with the continent and with its own past, which the English Church had lost as the Reformation in the 16th century. So my dear students, here we are talking about the Reformation in the 16th century as far as church is concerned. When you talk about Queen Elizabeth rule, so you could see the Protestant church was being practiced there in England, and that is also known as Anglican church as well. So my dear students, here you can see like because of this Oxford movement, people they try to you can say go back to the previous church, and they think that Protestant views are not good at all. Okay, so people should follow, English people they should follow the Catholic Church only. Okay, so here you can see Christianity according to them lost its traditions, and this is a result of the Reformation in the 16th century. Okay, my dear students, here we are focusing on England church. Okay, different kind of religious practices which were going on there. Why? Because they had the solid proofs for it as well. Like, why should you go for the Catholic Church in England? Because the Protestant church lost all its values, okay, of Christianity. For example, they were not in favor of having any kind of ritual or old traditions, for example ceremonies. So my dear students, that was their point of view to go for the Protestant church at that time. Okay, they recognized in the medieval and early church a habit of piety and genius of public worship which had both disappeared during the Elizabethan reign. So dear students, they are quite against the Protestant practices which were going on in England at that time. They therefore made an attempt to restore those virtues by turning the attention of the people to the history of the Middle Ages and by trying to recover the rituals and art of the medieval church. So dear students, medieval ages, when we talk about those ages, so you could see that's the revival during the Oxford movement. It's basically a revival of the medieval ages and of old church as well, okay, as I told you many times, Catholic and Protestant views of Christianity. So during this era, like in 16th century, from 16th to 18th centuries, my dear students, you can see Protestant practices were going on in England. So here this is a revival of Middle Ages kind of religion over here. They were of the view and they worked for the revival of Middle Ages literature as well, okay. They promoted Catholicism in England with a few reasons, like the Protestant view of Christianity lost all the traditions, okay. So my dear students, they were quite conservative people as well, okay. So they were of the view that we should go for the old traditions of practicing religion in country. On the other hand, Protestants, they were quite liberal people, okay. Dear students, by keeping in view the practices of the church at that time, we'll talk about you know, the Oxford movement in detail in the history of English literature, and that how far this literature has its impact on the entire history of English literature, okay. From another point of view, the Oxford movement was an attempt to meet the rationalist attack by emphasizing the importance of tradition, authority, and the emotional element in religion. It sought to revive the ancient rites with all their pomp and symbolism. It exalted the principle of authority, the hierarchy, and dogmatic teaching. So dear students, basically Protestants were quite rationalist kind of people. So this is basically you can say, like, you'll have to judge everything on the basis of rational, on the basis of logic and reason, okay. When there isn't any reason of performing any kind of religious duty, so you should not go for it. So my dear students, here you can say Catholic view of church is quite conservative. They had to follow certain traditions, okay, and they didn't have the margin of making amendments in their religious practices over here, okay. So basically they were emphasizing on the importance of tradition. What basically this tradition is a tradition of following the Catholic Church, plus everything must be under the custody of Pope, okay. So who was in Rome at that time, okay. So here, like, they worked for authority as well, like as far as you know, Roman Church is concerned. So definitely everything must be you know, under their control. And the emotional element in religion as well, like people, they must be emotional as far as their religion is concerned, okay. So there must be kind of emotional teachings in the church which should attract the common people of the society, and they should perform different kinds of rituals and you know, practices in the church, okay. So there must be an emotional attachment of the people with the church here. So basically they work for it, okay. And then it's sought to revive the ancient rites. So what basically are the ancient rites over here, like the practices which were going on during the Middle Ages, you can say, in history. So basically this is a revival of all those you can say ancient practices here, okay, and their pomp and symbolism as well, okay. So my dear students, Protestant, they were quite realistic people, okay. So they did not believe on symbols as such. So here when we talk about Catholicism, so people who belong to this kind of church, they were quite conservative and they had to follow certain traditions, okay. So they didn't allow any kind of you can say reformations in their religion as such, okay. So here this is they basically fought for you know, the principle of authority, the hierarchy, and dogmatic teaching. So my dear students, here hierarchy, like power must be there in the, you know, Roman Church only, and there is only one authority who is controlling the rest of the churches in the world. So if you just violate that authority, if you are not following the rules which are defined by that authority, so it means you are rebellious, okay. So my dear students, here this is their point of view, and which is the basic principle of the Oxford movement as well. Previously Protestant views of church were going on there in England. So here you can see, with the passage of time, when we are entering into Catholic Church once more, so dear students, you will feel you can say a definite change in literature as well, okay. So the impact of Oxford movement on literature, on English literature, okay, we'll talk about it. instead of being inspired by the doctrines of liberalism. So here what is liberalism? Like the Protestant views about Christianity which were preached in the Victorian period, it resumed its connection with the medieval tradition. So my dear students, liberalism, Protestant views were being practiced during the Victorian period. So here you can see like they were quite against those traditions, okay, and they were in favor of the revival of the medieval traditions in the era after the Victorian period. It was favorable to mystery and miracles and appealed to the sensibility and imagination which during the 18th century had been crushed by the supremacy of intellect. So dear students, once more you could see we are going towards mystery, we are going towards miracle and imagination, sensibility, okay. So here you could see these points are very much favored by the Oxford movement authors and the protagonists of the Oxford movement. So my dear students, they think like we cannot replace imagination, like your emotions or miracles, or you can say morality lessons with your intellect only. So it is not necessary that you have to give reason or logic of everything. So for them it's not at all essential, okay. So there must be an emotional kind of attachment with the church, plus the kind of literature which you are producing, that must be based on miracle plays, on morality plays. My dear students, as we discussed during the Anglo-Norman period, that's the second phase in the history of English literature. At that time people, they used to talk about miracle and morality plays, and there was a concept of courtly love as well, and there were certain kinds of romances during that period as well. So here you can see the revival of medieval ages once more in the 19th century, okay. So here you'll see the impact of Oxford movement and the religious practices which were going on at the time in England on literature, okay. The aesthetic aspect of the Oxford movement or the Catholic reaction. So my dear student, when somebody asks you like what were the trends which were going on after the Victorian era, or what is the importance of Oxford movement, so you just have to tell them like this is basically a religious movement, okay. So it was a reaction against the Protestant practices which were going on in the church at that time, had a much wider appeal. Even those who were not convinced by the argument advanced by the supporters of the movement were in sympathy with its aesthetic side. So my dear students, here you can see it doesn't have any kind of rational side only. They go for aesthetic side of you can say of life as well. So my dear students, basically people who did not support their argument at that time, they were even to some extent they were in favor of them, although they did not support, but they had some kind of sympathetic feelings with its aesthetic side. So my dear students, again let me tell you, like in order to evoke the emotional side of people, like as far as their religion is concerned, that is very much important according to the Oxford movement, okay. The lofty cathedral, aglow with the colors of painting, stately procession in gorgeous robes, and all the pomp and circumstances of the ceremonial religion attract even such puritanic minds as Milton's, and are almost the only attraction to the multitudes whose God must take a visible shape and be not too far removed from humanity. So my dear students, this was one of the point which is relevant to religion as well as the aesthetic sense of the people. So here you can see Puritanic, like Milton was a Puritan, so here you can see it also attracted him a lot, okay. So my dear students, like they were in favor of having religious ceremonies, plus you can say different kinds of events in order to practice your religion. So this is one of the points relevant to Catholic Church during that era, okay. So here you can see like they also define man's connection with the God. God is not just only visible like power, okay. So it has some kind of relationship with the humanity, and that is a direct relationship. So how can you define that relationship, or can you have that relationship with God? That is by offering you can say prayers, or you can say performing certain kinds of other religious activities in the church. So here the main thing, the main focus is on the authority of the church or the religious practices which should be followed in the country. Those are very much important. Thus, many who were only alienated by the arguments in favor of the Catholic reaction were in sympathy with this aspect of the reaction, with the bringing back of color and beauty into religious lives, with the appeal to the imagination and the feeling. So my dear students, here they are not just focusing on religion, they basically appeal to feeling and imagination as well. So dear students, some of the aspects you could see in the medieval ages, it was full of imagination, full of feelings, full of emotions, medieval literature. Okay, so when you talk about the Romantic literature, again the revival of the medieval concepts during that age. So here we are talking about 20th century literature. Okay, so after the Victorian period, you could see once more the concepts which were being followed by the Romantic writers and the medieval ages writers. So here you could see the essence of religious life plus those concepts. Okay, so my dear students, basically we are talking about the Oxford movement, and I told you this is a Catholic reaction. Okay, like Catholic practices must be there in England, so this was their viewpoint, and they brought a Catholic church in England, that everything must be under the control of Pope. Okay, so my dear students, like this is again a revival of the colors and beauty into the religious life. So people who were favoring this Oxford movement in the history of England, so you could see they were quite like they were saying like this is a combination of your religious life plus your feelings are there, your emotions, your imaginations are there. Okay, so these two powers are working together. So it does not mean that we are ignoring one aspect and we're just focusing on religion over here in the Oxford movement. So my dear students, it appeals, this Oxford movement appeals to the aesthetic, you can say aesthetics of the human beings as well. Okay, by following Catholic Church, so you can have a beautiful life, you can have a life full of imagination, so you can impressed by the beauty of nature, so you can express your feelings as well. So this is not at all a conservative view of looking at religion only. Still people, they have quite a lot of freedom, so they could go in whatever way they wanted to go as far as literature is concerned. Okay, so my dear students, here basically we are talking about the Oxford movement. It's a religious movement. So furthermore we'll talk about Oxford movement in detail, like how that is anti rationalist approach towards religion and towards literature as well. Okay, so we'll talk about it in detail now. Okay, anti-rationalism. So previously when we were talking about like the Oxford movement, so my dear students, I told you basically that was a reaction against rationalism and liberalism. So basically that movement is known as anti-rationalism as well. Okay, the Oxford movement stressed the absurdity of examining the church in the light of reason. Okay, so the Oxford men put special emphasis on faith as something super rational. The mainspring of the Oxford movement, observes Hugh Walker, was the dread of rationalism. Okay, so according to his wording, like that was basically the dread of rationalism. According to the same critic, the problem of Newman, the chief force of the movement, was how to check the growth of rationalism as he saw it in England. So my dear students, again you can see like here he is discussing the problem of Newman. Okay, so basically what was the problematic factor for Newman, who is you can say the chief force of this movement. So my dear students, we are talking about Oxford movement in the history of English literature and its importance. So here dear students, you can see like this is basically that movement is anti-rational movement. Okay, so you could see the points of different critics who talked about the Oxford movement over here. Like basically this is the dread of rationalism, and this was basically created to check the growth of rationalism as Newman saw it in England. So basically that was the problem of England at that time. Like my dear students, we are talking about the age of reason over here. So you could see like people were so much liberal, they had freedom of their religion as well. They could go for any kind of religion, okay, and you could see like according to the Oxford movement, they were just destroying the dignity of the church. So that is why this very movement is based on conservative ideas, okay. This aggression anti-rationalism manifested itself in the Oxford man's affirmation of the miracles associated with the history of the ancient church and numerous saints. So my dear students, as you could see, like with the passage of time, sometimes there is a revival of learning, revival of the previous practices of church, revival of religion. So here you can see like this is basically you can say the revival of the history of ancient church once more in England, okay. So the people influenced by science in the age were already finding it too hard to give credence to the numerous scriptural miracles, and the Oxford men were adding new ones which had never been seriously believed except perhaps by the every Orthodox Roman Catholics. So my dear students, here this is all about the Oxford movement, like how people during that age, they were very much influenced by the science, okay. So that is why that is an age of rational, an age of objectivity, an age of science, okay. So dear students, here you can see like people who started working for the Oxford movement, this is their point of view, how did they add certain things in religion at that time, okay. The flagrant anti-rationalism, certainly out of tune with the times, naturally alienated many otherwise sympathetic people. So my dear students, here you can see the most important point from this slide today is the revival of the ancient church once more in England, okay. Romantic. This anti-rationalism was somewhat romantic, okay. Indeed, between the Romantic movement and the Oxford movement, there is something curiously common. The Romantic interest in the Middle Ages for their mystery and splendor is one of these common factors. As Moody and Lovett put it, the Oxford movement stood for the restoration of the poetry, the mystic ritual and service which had characterized the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. It was this medievalism which was probably responsible for the ultimate entry of a new man into the Roman Catholic fold. Okay, I just want to highlight some of the things over here. Like you can see this was basically a moment which came between Romantic movement and the Victorian era. Okay, my dear students, here I just want to tell you some of the points relevant to the Romantic movement about which we will be talking after this one. Okay, so basically you can see the revival of poetry over there, and they were very much the romantic poets and the writers, they were very much impressed by the Middle Ages, and you can say like that was the revival of the mystery and love stories of the medieval ages over there in the Romantic period. Okay, so my dear students, here this is basically a comparison of Romantic and Oxford movement. What basically are the things common in both the movements? Okay, so here you can see this is basically the restoration of the poetry, the mystic ritual and service had characterized the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. Okay, so when we talk about Romantic movement, so you can see like that is they were very much interested in the Middle Ages for their mystery, okay, so and splendor, and you can say like this is one of these common factors. As far as the Oxford movement is concerned, so you could see over here basically that was the revival of the Middle Ages once again. But as far as the church is concerned, when we talk about the Romantic movement in the history of English literature, so they were very much impressed by the mystery, or you can say the overall themes of that very poem. Okay, so that is the revival of the themes of the mystery, you can say, of the stories in the Romantic era. So when we talk about the church, so here like as far as religion is concerned, so the revival of the medieval religion or church here in Oxford movement. Okay, so basically it was this medievalism which was probably responsible for the ultimate entry of Newman into the Roman Catholic fold. So basically this is you can say an impact of medievalism on the Oxford movement as well, which led Newman into the Roman Catholic fold. Okay, so here you can see like how there was a revival of the medieval ages once more during the Romantic era, as well as in the Oxford movement. The revival of the thoughts, of the themes, and you can say of the mystery, it kind of plays the medieval writers, they used to write the revival of all those things in the Romantic era. And as far as church is concerned, so here my dear students, you can see that's the restoration of church during the Oxford movement. Okay, so basically that was the most dominating factor which was involved in the creation of the Oxford movement and in the development of it as well. Like they focused on church a lot. Okay, on like the religion. For them religion was the most important factor. Okay, so the romantic tendency of the protagonists of the Oxford movement is also apparent in a different way, that is in form of their poetry. As Eugene R. Fairweather points out, their poetic sensibility, which cannot be ignored in view of the fact that Cardinal Newman and William were fluent, if minor poets, was romantic in tone. So there was a romantic tendency among the protagonists of the Oxford movement as well. As you can see, like in this quotation, that is by Eugene R. Fairweather. So my dear students, you can see their poetic sensibility. So my dear students, we are talking about the Oxford movement protagonists. Okay, so basically their poetic sensibility which cannot be ignored. So my dear students, again you can say like they focused on poetry a lot in view of the fact that Cardinal Newman and Williams were all fluent, if minor poets was romantic in tone. You can see like although the minor poets of that time, they were quite fluent, okay, but still you can see like they were quite romantic in their tone. So you can see the romantic tendency in their works. Okay, so my dear students, basically the point is that here I'm just trying to give you a picture, a true picture of the Oxford movement and its comparison with the romantic movement. So basically when they talk about religion, or you can say the social issues of the society, so there you can say tone was quite romantic. Okay, my dear students, here you can see on this slide one more terminology, that is anti-Essentialism. Okay, but the fundamental factor which spoke of the movement and which was taken cognizance of and condemned by almost all the brethren was the increasing interference of secular authority in the affairs of the church. All of them were a dagger drawn with Essentialism. Basically what do we mean by this term is the control of the church by the state. So my dear students, here you can see this is again a rebellious attitude towards this concept as well, like the church was under the control of state at that time. So my dear students, you can see like this Oxford movement is very much against the control of the church by state. Okay, so basically this is an anti-Essentialism movement as well. Okay, the chief aim of the Oxford movement, in the words of one of its protagonists, was to convince the people that church was more than a merely human institution, that it had privileges, sacraments, a ministry ordained by Christ. Moody and Lovett observe in this quotation, Newman and his friends wished also to defend the church in view of its divine character against the interference of the state, which was disposed to reform it along with Parliament and other institutions, curtailing its power and revenues. So my dear students, here you can see basically this Oxford movement was you can say anti-Essentialism. Okay, so my dear students, basically at that time church was under the control of state. So the protagonists, or you can say people who worked for Oxford movement, they were very much against it. Okay, so they basically work for the divine you can say power of church at that time. So in the third line you can see the church was so basically they would just try to convince people of that time the church was more than a merely human institution, that it had privileges, sacraments, a ministry ordained by Christ. So basically this is the divinity of the church at that time. Okay, so basically that was ordained by church, so they try to convince people of that time to go for it and to, you know, fight for their rights, or you can say to fight for the power of a church, because that is already ordained by, or that is you can say run by the Christ. So there isn't any need of interference of the state of that time to run that. Okay, so here my dear students, you can see like they just wanted to separate these two institutions of society. One is politics and the other one is church. So according to them, like if parliament, or you can say the political figures, they, you know, interfere in the church matter, so definitely it would lose its divinity over here. Okay, so according to the wording of Moody and Lovett, Newman and his followers who wished also to defend the church. So basically they defended the church, and they were trying to convince people of that time like there is a divine power who is working behind the church, so we do not need any political interference as far as the religious matters of the country are concerned. Okay, so here you can see like they focused on its divine character. Okay, so they were against the interference of the state. Okay, and furthermore they were also against the interference of parliament and other institutions. Okay, like you can say like power which was behind working the church, so they just wanted to you know give that power to Christ. Okay, they just tried to convince people there is a divine power who is working behind church, who is behind their religion, so we do not need any human power, any human institution to work for church. So my dear students, in a nutshell, I just want to explain this slide to you. Basically Newman and his followers, they were just trying to separate these two institutions from each other. One is politics and the other one is religion. So my dear students, basically they were of the view like Christ walks behind the church, so there isn't any need of political figures, or you can say parliament or other human institutions, political institutions to work for church. So basically this was the most dominating factor which was involved you know in the creation of the Oxford movement at that time. Okay, thus the Oxford movement stood for anti-essentialism. Okay, thus you can say the Oxford movement stood for anti-essentialism. So my dear student, what basically is essentialism? Like church would be under the control of state, under the control of, you can say, parliament of that time. So my dear students, this is a reaction against those thoughts, like church is already under, you know, under Christ, so there isn't any need of any kind of interference from the state over here. Okay, so this is the, you can say, the most important point of Oxford movement. Okay, the history of the movement, so that was just an introduction of the movement, and we talked about you know the Oxford movement in relation to Romantic movement, and that was an anti-liberal movement as well. So my dear students, at the end of that of the previous discussion, we talked about that was an anti-Essentialism movement as well. Okay, so here let me tell you the brief history of the movement. They were the most important points which shaped the Oxford movement, but the Brethren were no means a united lot. A brief survey of the history of this movement will show this. So I'll explain this concept of Brethren as well, okay, as far as the Oxford movement is concerned. Basically, Newman was the soul of the movement, but generally the name of John Keble is mentioned as the man who started the movement. So basically, who developed this movement or who created this movement, the name of that person is John Keble. Later on it was further furnished, you can say further polished by Newman. In July 1833, Keble preached a sermon at Oxford before the judges of assize on national apostasy and against the Essentian and Latitudinarian. tendencies of the day. His speech formally inaugurated the movement, and even Newman accepted Cable as its true and primary author. So my dear students, here you can see, like, for the very first time in 1833, like when Cable, he gave or he preached a sermon at Oxford. Okay, so here you can see, like, with his you can say speech, the formal inauguration of this movement was done at that time. And even later on, Newman, who is basically known as the soul of the movement, he accepted, he acknowledged, you can say, Cable for his effort which he had done for the Oxford movement. Okay, basically he himself considered Cable as the main and primary author of that movement as well, and the true author as well. Okay, but it must be noted that Cable only provided the spark. The fuel had already been piling for long. Cable was a quite simple and modest man, not of much literary pretension, but known for his anonymous book of sacred poems, The Christian Year, that was published in 1827. According to Hugh Walker, there is nothing great in his life or in his works. Anyway, he is accepted pioneer of the Oxford movement. So basically, my dear students, here you can see, like, although he was the founder of the Oxford movement, but he was not a well-known person as far as his publications were concerned. So here you can see the name of his book. So basically, that was an anonymous book, okay, and the name of the book is The Christian Year, and where he talked about religion, okay, of that time. So my dear students, here you can see there is nothing great in his life or in his works, okay. So my dear students, that was the only book which we still remember, okay. So still he is the pioneer of the Oxford movement, okay. Cable's sermon was followed by the generation of intense feeling in like-minded men of Oxford. They included Newman, Freud, Pusey, and many more. Their concerted action crystallized in the publication of tracts for the time, the first of which came in September 1833. It was entitled Thought on the Ministerial Commission, respectfully addressed to the clergy. The publication of the tracts continued till 1841 with contributions from many hands. Okay, the publication of the tracts continued till 1841 with contributions from many hands. However, Newman, who wrote some 29 of them, was, as Hugh Walker puts it, the soul of the tracts. None approached him in the clarity of thought as well as of expression. So my dear students, here you can see, like, their concerted action which was there in the publication of tracts for the time. So my dear students, it was the very first time when it was published. The year was 1833. Okay, so basically Newman was the most prominent figure of the Oxford movement, and you can see, like, as far as the clarity of his thoughts are concerned, so nobody can compete with him. Okay, and as far as the expression is concerned, so again we cannot find a perfect match over here. Okay, so we can say, like, Newman was the only prominent figure of the Oxford movement. So my dear students, here basically we are talking about the impact of Oxford movement on English literature. Okay, so my dear students, here you can see, like, we'll be talking about the romantic movement as well, or romanticism in the history of English literature as well. So my dear students, basically this is this was happening during that era. Okay, that was a moment which was going on in England, you can say, like, between the romantic era. Okay, the evolved aim of the tracts was to create public opinion in favor of the privileges of church and against popery and dissent. However, slowly and steadily, the trend of thought as expressed in the tracts showed evidence of moving towards the Church of Rome and away from the Church of England. Things came to a head in the famous, rather notorious tract XC, which came from Newman's pen. So my dear students, here you can see, like, a revolution as far as the church of that time was concerned. So people, they were quite towards, you can say, the Church of Rome as compared to the Church of England. Okay, my dear students, so basically that was another most important point of that time. Like, with the publication of these tracts, you can say Newman was the most prominent figure. You could see like they convinced people to go for the Roman Church. So my dear students, here when we relate it to the medieval ages, so you can say the church of the medieval times once more, here in the Oxford movement we can see, okay, the tracts which Newman published. In it, Newman showed his Romish tendency by taking upon himself the task of arguing that the 39 articles were in no way opposed to the Council of Trent. In other words, he was making plea for the Church of Rome and undermining a universally accepted Anglican view. This tract created a tremendous commotion. All the Anglican bishops condemned it. Newman's conversion was complete after he had read articles by a wise man, the able leader of the English Roman Catholics. So my dear students, here you can see like we are talking about the inspiration of, you can say, Newman as well. Like he was converted, you can say, after reading articles by a wise man who was basically a leader of the English Roman Catholics. So my dear students, here you can see basically he promoted Anglican view about church. Okay, again there must not be any kind of interference from the state here as far as the church matters are concerned. The general hostility which Newman provoked made it impossible for him to continue staying at Oxford. So he took refuge at Littlemore. He resigned his ecclesiastical living at Oxford in September 1843 and joined lay communion. Some of his ardent followers also joined him at Littlemore. So my dear students, here basically this is all about Newman life as well, the way he left Oxford and he moved to Littlemore. Okay, so some of his followers, they also joined him over there. Okay, so my dear students, basically he resigned from his, you can say, ecclesiastical living. Okay, so these ecclesiastical things, these are relevant to church. Okay, so he resigned from there and then he moved to another place, and it happened in September 1843. Okay, we are again talking about who promoted the Oxford movement. So here you can see like W.H. Ward is one of the followers of Newman. So he published a book according to W.H. Hutton. So you can say this is basically a heavy and exasperating book. Okay, the idea of a Christian church. Ward openly favored the Roman church, pointing to what he described as the most joyful, most wonderful, most expected sight. We find the whole cycle of Roman doctrine gradually processing members of English churchmen. So my dear students, like as you could see, like the way Newman left the place Oxford, then he moved to another place, that is Littlemore. So meanwhile W.H. Ward, he published a book. The name of the book is The Idea of a Christian Church. Okay, so my dear students, here you can see like it is basically a heavy and exasperating book. So my dear students, in this book he basically favored Roman church a lot. Okay, and most of the people, they also came towards the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so this is basically, you can say, a shift from the English church to the Roman Catholic Church over here. Okay, it was basically a very provocative book. This scandalized members of the university at a convocation held on February 13, 1845, withdrew from war the degree of BA and MA. The book had a wide influence, but it is poor literature. Well did Jenkins, the master of Balliol, tell Ward, "Well, Ward, your book is like yourself, fat, awkward and ungainly." So basically you can see these are the remarks of Jenkins, like who talked about his book and said like this book is fat and that's ungainly and that's awkward like you. So my dear students, here when we talk about this author, so basically his publications are not that much worthwhile. Okay, so although the concepts are quite clear, or you can say like the way he promoted Roman Catholic Church in England, that was okay, but when we talk about the style, or you can say the organization of the book, so that is not at all worthwhile. Okay, Newman's conversion to Roman Catholicism was formally complete when on October 9, 1845, he became a member of the Church of Rome. Later in 1879, the Pope made him a cardinal, but after 1845, the Oxford movement spread beyond Oxford. The Brethren were no longer perfectly united. Some, like Ward, accepted Roman Catholicism, but others, like Pusey, continued their work staying within the Anglican fold. So my dear students, here you can see like he became you can say the cardinal of church in 1879, and you can see like after 1845 the Oxford movement was just not just limited to Oxford only, so it was basically well known to other cities of England as well. So my dear students, basically here you can say again our debate is on Anglican church, or you can say Roman Catholic church of that time. Okay, so you can see like some of the followers of Newman, like Ward, also converted to Roman Catholicism, but some of them, like Pusey, they continued writing like by keeping in view the Anglican fold once more time. Okay, so here some of the writers of the Oxford movement, you can say like they accepted you can say Roman Catholicism, okay, as far as their religion is concerned, and some of them they remained in the previous you can say church, that was basically the English church. So my dear students, as far as the writings are concerned, so you'll see the elements of you can say both the churches over there. One is English church and the other one is Roman Catholic church in their writings. Okay, the literary aspect of the movement. The religious movement was basically a religious movement. Directly it had nothing to do with literature. However, the numerous writings which it threw up had some impact on contemporary literary taste and style. Previously also divines such as Hooker, Jeremy Taylor and Tillotson had exerted some influence on literature even when they had written on purely religious themes. W.S. Hutton maintains in this context as well. So my dear students, here you can see like once more time we are talking about the same thing, like basically that was a religious movement which was going on in England. So as far as literature is concerned, so basically it had nothing to do with literature. The writers like Hooker, Jeremy Taylor and Tillotson, they they wrote about religious issues and their writings they do have impact on English literature. Okay, so but the thing over here is that like all the writers of the Oxford movement, they basically talked about religious themes in their writings. Okay, the Oxford movement certainly belongs to the history of English religion more definitely than to the history of English literature, but it had great influence outside its own definite members on the literary taste of its age. But out of the whole mass of the literature, the movement gave rise to, we can pick out as good literature only a handful of poems and apologia, which is in Hugh Walker Ward's eminently and emphatically literature. As for the rest of the works, they are biblia, books that are no books. Okay, so my dear students, here you can say like they were so-called books, but basically those are not books. So here you can see like here this is the name of the book, that is Apologia. So you can see when we talk about the literature that was written under the influence of the Oxford movement, so my dear students, you can see like basically the writers of that time, they could not produce good literature as such, but they did have an impact of the religious practices or you can say the revolution as far as the English church was concerned on the writings of other people at that time. Okay, so here you can see the name of the book as well, Apologia. So my dear students, basically this is the most important work which was written during the Oxford movement. Okay, Cable. So we'll talk about some of the writers of the Oxford movement over here, like who initiated it and who developed that movement. Cable, John Cable, he was born in 1792 and died in 1866, was professor of poetry at Oxford and an Anglican preacher. It was he, as we have already said, who started the Oxford movement with his famous sermon of 1833. He could boast of no intellectual caliber, though he was a saintly, simple and humble figure. He, according to Compton Rickett's point of view, gives us the emotional atmosphere of the moment. His literary merits are negligible, but some of his poetry is enjoyable for its sincerity and emotion. So my dear students, here you can say basically he was a saint, he was quite humble and simple person. So my dear students, you could see his writings are not worthwhile, but still we can enjoy some of his writings as far as you can say the sincerity and the emotional attachment of the writer with you can say the religion of that time, or you can say the society of that time are concerned. Okay, so basically this is all about you can say Keble, who initiated the movement with his sermon that he gave in 1833 at Oxford. Okay, Newman. So basically my dear students, when we talk about Newman, he was the spirit behind the Oxford movement, and you could see like he is basically the indicating number, and his contribution to English literature is also the most considerable. His policed sincerity and simplicity, which are his distinguishing marks as both man and as writer, are evidently visible in his best work Apologia Pro Vita Sua, which he wrote in self-defense in reply to Charles Kingsley's charge of dishonesty against both himself and his new church. So basically you can see the name of his best-known work, that is Apologia Pro Vita Sua. So that is you know, a reaction, you can say, or a kind of a reply to Charles Kingsley's charge of dishonesty against church and himself and his new church. So basically my dear students, you could see Newman was the most prominent figure as far as the Oxford movement in the history of English literature is concerned. So you can see his sincerity, his dedication, his honesty in his works as well. So his best known work, as I told you, is Apologia Pro Vita Sua, okay, and that was published in 1864. Newman was stung into action, immediately took up the task of writing an apology to explain his conduct. As he puts it, he made his fingers walk 20 miles a day so as to finish his work quickly. So my dear students, again we are here talking about one more work that is basically, you can say, a kind of apology. The Apologia is characterized by what Hugh Walker calls a palpitating humanity which vivifies every line. In this work, Newman has poured his heart and soul out. It has, says W.H. Hutton, the merit of a letter rather than of a book. So basically this apologia is a kind of letter according to, you can say, W.H. Hutton, and that's not a book. But Newman is a finished artist. The greatest recommendation of his prose is its discreetness and simplicity. This crystalline simplicity, however, is the outcome of a rigorous art and abundant energy in check. So my dear students, basically here this is a discussion on his work Apologia, okay, and he really worked hard to complete that work quickly. And you could see like usually people used to think that this is a kind of letter rather than a book, okay. Newman's other works, like the Essay of the Development of Christian Doctrine, was published in 1845. The Idea of a University, defined 1873, and religious novels Loss and Gain 1848 and Calypstia in 1856 have also the same qualities of style. He wrote well, but the only memorable poem written by him is the famous prayer poem Lead Kindly Light. So my dear students, basically you can see like he wrote poems and he wrote novels as well, and you could see the names of different writings you know, of Newman over here on this slide, okay. So here the famous prayer, you can say, in form of poem is Lead Kindly Light, okay. Harold Froude, this is you can say another literary figure in during the Oxford movement in the history of English literature. So Richard Harold Froude was born in 1803 and died in 1836, was a link between Keble and Newman. He was doubtlessly a brilliant young man. He is chiefly known for his posthumous remains. He wrote 2 of the tracts for the Times and some poems. He was, as he himself said, quite hot-headed, and he offended quite a number of people. So my dear students, here this is a discussion about one more author of that time, during the Oxford movement, Harold Forer. So you can see basically he was a kind of link between Newman and Cable. Okay, so here you can see like he wrote 2 of the texts for the Times and some poems as well. So according to him, like he was a kind of hot-headed person, and he offended quite a number of people at that time. So basically he was a kind of person who was very aggressive. Okay, Pusey, another literary figure during the Oxford movement. His name is Edward Beauvais Pusey, and he was born in 1800 and died in 1882. He was basically a man of very wide learning. He gave his name to the protagonist of the Oxford movement, who came to be commonly termed Puseyites. But in almost every respect, he is inferior to Newman. As Compton Rickett observes, he is far less attractive as a personality, more questionable in his methods, and immeasurably inferior as a literary craftsman. Considered from the literary point of view, Pusey's work is indeed hopeless. His style, according to Hugh Walker, is crude, ungainly, and confused. So my dear students, although you can say he used to call himself a very kind of prominent figure during the Oxford movement, but according to, you can say, the different opinions of different critics over here, you can say like he was quite inferior to Newman. Okay, Ward, another literary figure during the Oxford movement, William George Ward. He was born in 1812 and died in 1882. Was an extremely talented man who followed Newman's lead in conversion to Roman Catholicism. So basically, when we were talking about like the way Newman converted to Roman Catholicism, so he was also one of the followers who converted to Roman Catholicism at that time. We have already referred to the idea of a Christian church, which is his best known work. His essays on the philosophy of theism, that was basically collected in 1884, were written to controvert the views of Mill. His style is inelegant and cumbrous, but his ideas stirred his time. So basically, my dear students, he was you can say the most prominent follower of Newman, who is the soul of this movement. So here you can see a discussion on his work, that is the idea of the Christian church and the philosophy of theism. So basically you can say his writings are a true depiction of that time. So you could see all the religious debates which were going on during that time, and he worked for Roman Catholicism as well. Okay, another literary figure during the Oxford movement is Richard William Church, and he was born in 1850 and died in 1890. Is after Newman the best of those connected with the Oxford movement in the literary quality of their words. So he is also one of the prominent figures as far as the Oxford movement is concerned. But when we talk about literature of that time, so my dear students, here you can see like after Newman, Church takes his place. His clear and vigorous style, his sympathy and eclecticism are apparent in his monographs on writers as diverse in their nature and art as Dante, Spencer and Bacon. So my dear students, here you can see like he imitated the style of Dante, Bacon and Spencer in his writings. Church also wrote a quite objective history of the Oxford movement, published posthumously in 1891. With a rare degree of self-effacement, he refrains from mentioning his own name in his history, even though he had played an important role in the movement. So basically, my dear students, here you can see he was very much impressed by the style of writing of Dante, Spencer and Bacon. So he basically talked about Oxford movement a lot, okay, and you can say the religious factors which were going on at that time. He debated on all those issues a lot, but without his name. Okay, so in order to conclude Oxford movements, let me recall some of the things which we have discussed today. Basically, that was a religious kind of movement which was going on in England during the Romantic era. Okay, my dear students, this Oxford movement would come time and again, and we'll be talking about it, different writers who were very much impressed by the Oxford movement. So basically, it had you can say a religious soul in that movement. So we talked about the prominent figures during that movement, okay, who were basically the followers of Newman, who is the soul of the movement. Okay, apart from those mentioned, there is a whole hydra more. which to use Dryden's words. So my dear students, here I'm going to use Dryden words in order to explain anything. To speak the rest, who better are for God, would tire a well-bred witness of the plot. So I'll explain it to you as well. So here you can see, like, basically they talked about religion a lot in their writings. That was the true essence of the Oxford movement as well. So my dear students, here you can see, like, their works are not that much appreciated today, and most of their works are forgotten. So my dear students, here you can see, like, their works are not that much well known because they just talked about religion in their writings. There wasn't any kind of variety in their writings. Okay, to quote Eugene R. Finway, the Oxford movement, for all its profound conservatism, seriously altered the accepted patterns of Anglican thought and practice. For one thing, it directed the attention of the people to personal holiness and was responsible for reviving or confirming the practices of serious prayers, formal piety and fasting. So my dear students, according to Eugene, you can see, like, basically that movement was relevant to conservatism only, and they focused on, you can say, serious prayers, on fasting and on formal piety, and these are, you can say, the most important points of that movement. And they also talked about personal holiness, plus you can say, so according to them, church must not be under the control of state. Like, they just wanted to separate, you can say, both the entities. One is religion and the other one is politics. So my dear students, basically that was the essence of the Oxford movement at that time. And you could see, like, they also worked for the Roman Catholic Church instead of the English Church. Okay, it reoriented the common views about apostolic authority, and with some success discovered a link between the Church of England and the pre-Reformation Church of Rome. It made the Church of England conscious of the onslaught of liberalism and essentialism. Thus, the Oxford movement was more than a passing ripple on the surface of the sea of faith. So, my dear students, they fought for faith, and you can say the replacement of, the Church of England at that time with the, the pre-Reformation Church, that is the Roman Catholic Church as well. A true depiction of religion of that time in their writings. So, basically, they fought for the Roman Catholic, views of religion as compared to the English Church of that time. So my dear student, that was all about the Oxford movement in the history of English literature. So this is really a very important topic, and whenever you will be talking about the different other writers, like during the Romantic movement, so we'll be talking about these the writers or the impact of the Oxford movement on the works of different authors. So my dear student, that was all about today, the the Oxford movement and its importance in the history of English literature. Okay, so my dear students, hope you are enjoying the lectures, and hope the things are easy for you. Hope to see you again with a new topic. Fine, have a nice day. Allah Hafiz.